So I started clay in high school on a wheel that's like the wheel I use today, on a kick wheel. We had luckily a teacher who was at the end of his career who had done a lot of clay work. And then I went on after high school to become an apprentice potter for a year in a fairly traditional pottery. And I went to art school with the intention of doing ceramics and never actually entered into the ceramics department. I did everything else. There was from cinema to sculpture and photography, and then ended up in a school for cinema in Chicago. And in Chicago, that's where I started to going back to ceramics as a hobby or as a passion. I'd say it's been 15 years since I've been in France, and it's been 5 years since I've started working with ceramics again. In between those times, I was working with all different kinds of other materials. More after years of working with wood, I felt as though now that everything was in panels, I'd lost my savoir-faire, my knowledge of the material. So 5-6 years ago, I returned to ceramics, looking for something that I wasn't finding in this other path in life. And I was looking for something that was a little more real, simple, something that took a lot of ability, savoir-faire in French. Something also that allowed me to have a little bit more of a path that corresponded with an artistic activity. So when I started ceramics, again, 5 years ago, I'm in a city situation, actually in the center of the city, and I only had the choice of using an electric kiln. And for me, the electric kiln is incredibly standard, industrial. It produces the same effects every time. There's a computer that controls the kiln. I really have nothing to do with the firing process. And all of that, the first glazes that I fired, all of this, I found really incredibly boring. At the very beginning, I was kind of disappointed in the effects that I was getting from the electric kiln, and there was no chance coming out of the electric kiln. Everything was incredibly controlled. It took me a while to understand that the electric kiln imposed a certain amount of creativity, that I was going to have to try to use the material, the clay and the glazes differently than I would traditionally. And so I started doing a single firing, which has become incredibly important to my work. With the single firing process as well, I started doing simply painting my glazes onto my pots. And in fact, I created a bit of chance in the electric kiln, something where I could work on a series of pieces, but each one was individual. So that actually had some individuality to each and every piece. So I continued with that process for quite a while until I decided that I wanted to add other things into the clay. And the first thing I added into the clay was sand from the Loire River. It started to build in complications. And little by little, I was building in complications to the way that I was working, so that each piece was becoming more and more unique, but also a little more complicated to achieve. The raw clay doesn't expand and contract the same as a processed clay. And so when it's drying, it is actually cracking and falling off the pots, which creates the texture. It draws itself. So this whole process of using clay, different clays that I find, different clay bodies, different materials that I'm mixing into, is really trying to build into my process of making different layers of problems that I have to resolve, or that different conflicts of material, different chance, so that each piece does become unique because of the different layers that have gone into it, between whether it is the sand, the glazing, the reaction of the clay, the wild clay, and the clay body. Where I've kind of fallen back in love with the electric kiln, because the electric kiln actually works. Since it's so regular, I can know that it's going to continually fire to the exact perfect temperature. And then I can throw everything I want at it as far as strange clays and mixes and materials, and come up with something interesting. So one of the biggest parts of my work is actually the research to create my glazes. And it's one of the things that I get lost in quite easily. It's probably the part that I think is the most interesting. It's the part between the alchemy and science. Now for the past 2 years, I'm using mostly materials that I can recuperate myself in nature. So by using all of these raw materials, I call them raw or wild materials since they don't come directly out of a bag, it's put me on a path that I don't necessarily know where it's going to take me, which is actually quite exciting. I don't know exactly what I'm looking for, and I'm not trying to set a goal to achieve. I really want to just let the material take me where it needs to go. Sometimes I consider myself to be more like a painter with a palette of colors, or the material replaces the palette of colors and I can use those for their unpredictability. So I'm not necessarily looking to recreate pieces or to create pieces that look like archaeological finds or archaeological pieces, but I am very influenced by the textures and the material quality that I find on ancient pieces. The idea is also that they are usable everyday objects. That's also very important to me, that people can live with beautiful objects and use them every day. So all of my glazes are also formulated so that they're 100% food safe. People can eat out of them. You can use them as storage vessels. I think humanity has always been searching in ceramics for this kind of perfection. If you look at prehistoric pots, some prehistoric pots are modernist forms before modernism existed. And those forms are all quite elegant forms. But I'm looking to create an aesthetic that is a brutal elegance.